me. Thank you so much, Siobhán, for inviting me to be here. It's been such a pleasure to be asked to think about and to respond to Siobhán's work. So this beautiful and incredibly ambitious and really richly imagined solo show, Love Beyond Species and the Sexual. And it presents, as Anna was saying, a chapter of Xenophon, which is this speculative world that Siobhán has been building for over a decade now. And it's an extraordinarily rich project that it unfolds across these layers of research and ecology and science and fiction and sculpture. And this is the first time that 3 acts of this work have been brought together in Ellen. And when Siobhán and I spoke recently, she told me about how meaningful it was that Ellen would be host to this exhibition, because Ellen has been part of your life for so long. You said earlier, of course, you showed your work for the first time as a transition year student. The first place that you realised that art was something that you could do. And so this idea of hosting certainly being exactly the right way to think about the relationship between yourself and Ellen and the work, because in a sense it's been part of psychology, right, since the very beginning, for years and years. And so I was thinking about this conversation, I was thinking about how am I going to find a way in to talk about the complexity of this work without taking up an hour of your time. And I kept on coming back to this idea of hospitality. And hospitality is maybe a thread through Siobhán's practice. And more specifically, this idea of philosophers called radical hospitality, which is the willingness to welcome what is unfamiliar, what is unknowable, and even unsettling maybe, to make room for forms of life that exceed our own expectations and our own priorities. So I'm going to think about that as a way into this exhibition. And I want to not address the exhibition as a whole right yet, but just to start in this room. Because we're in Act 3 of Xenophon, right here. So this room contains the chapter on the act Decomposition is Devotion, and the land longs for you. I'm not going to explain all of the kind of backstory and the various characters, because part of the joy of this exhibition for you is, or will be, exploring that for yourself. I don't want to foreclose any of that for you. But what I want to do is maybe to ask you to attend to the ways in which the works in this room invite you to behave. So you're invited to sit down by the mycelium there and to listen to a meditation. You are invited to pick up some of these sculptural objects and inhale their scent. You're invited to step into the space of this cylinder, which is made of this bioplastic that contains material from rhododendron, and to inhale its scent. Very small but very important caveat, this is the only room of the exhibition where you couldn't touch this. Okay, so everywhere else it's hands off. But I still wanted to draw your attention to this really important distinction, because most exhibitions ask you to just look only. But this invites you in bodily. It offers you a kind of a physical hospitality in a different way. And hospitality in that sense becomes more than metaphorical, right? It's a physical, actual thing. And the work itself is deeply hospitable in lots of other senses. It exists because of this extraordinary network of collaborators. And I'm going to reiterate again a lot of the information that Anne has provided. I think it's really important to note and to note everybody's contribution here. So obviously Ellen, who's hosted Siobhán on residency for the last number of months, but it also involves the work of the olfactory artist Frank Bloom, the intimacy coach Grace Alice O'Shea, the mycelium artist and researcher Catherine Uwale, the sound artist Billy Kemp, the disability activist and multisensory artist Emily Conway, the friends of mine Ross Wood, who helped Siobhán gather lots of the materials out here today, So the exhibition itself is this product of shared knowledge and shared thinking. And when I was thinking about the show, I kept on returning to the role of scent in your work. Because the breathing, when you think about it, it's one of the strangest forms of hospitality that we experience, right? So when we inhale a scent, we're not just observing it, right? We're taking it into our bodies. And we take it inside ourselves. It crosses this boundary between the artwork and the viewer, in a way that the visual never can. And suddenly, the work isn't simply out there, it's inside you, it becomes a part of you. It's inside your body. And that's quite transgressive. It's quite mischievous. And it also reminds us, in this very startling way, that our bodies are never sealed off from the world. We're breathing together in this room. We're perspiring in the humidity of Islam. Our bodies are exchanging matter with the space around us. And even our presence here is going to contribute, in subtle ways perhaps, to the ways in which these materials are going to transform and perhaps decompose. So we're never separate from the environment that we inhabit. It's been an extraordinarily hot and dry summer. Many of us have physically felt the overwhelm of it. Climate change is no longer something that happens elsewhere. The world is acting upon us as forcefully now as we have acted upon it. And so that old kind of truism, that old falsehood that humans stand outside of nature, observing it and managing it, that is impossible to sustain. The philosopher of science and art, Donna Haraway, writes, "It matters what matters we used to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories. It matters what stories make worlds and what worlds make stories." And that kind of interestingly convoluted sentence keeps returning to me, because our ecological crisis is also a crisis of imagination. What stories are capable of helping us think differently? And this is where I think Siobhán's work is so important. Rather than offering us up some kind of scientific explanation for the relationships between rhododendrons and the Killarney fern and Myross wood, it offers this kind of speculative, open-ended intimacy. And so rather than asking us to kind of gain some mastery over the more than human world, it asks us to become newly curious about it. And the project began, after all, with Siobhán trying to understand her own garden, and specifically Japanese knotweed, which is a plant that is almost always described in this language of invasion and warfare and eradication. But rather than focusing on how to rid her garden of this, how to destroy it, Siobhán began asking different questions. How do you get to know a neighbour that is radically indifferent to you? And that's a really profound shift, because it moves then from, it replaces hostility with curiosity. It replaces control with coexistence, extraction with relationships. And throughout Siobhán, throughout the 3 acts of this, Siobhán continually translates these ecological relationships into forms that are familiar to us, into things like dating apps and therapy speak, and these kind of steamy melodramas, kind of speculative fiction, this romance. And this isn't because she's saying that plants and fungi have relationships that mirror the way our relationships operate, but it's because we cannot entirely escape our human ways of imagining things. The point is not that these translations are true, but the point is that they allow us to begin to pay attention differently. And once we do that, the familiar landscape around us, the rhododendrons, the ferns, the dock leaves, the mauritia, the woodland. It becomes kind of populated with these relationships and tensions and dependencies that were always there, but that maybe escaped our notice. So the exhibition asks us to decenter ourselves, not to diminish humanity, but in order to reconnect more fully with the kind of extraordinary community of life that we are part of. And that brings me back to hospitality again. Because it's also about recognizing that we are always already hosts ourselves. Our bodies are host to millions of mitochondria in our gut flora, and fungi and protozoa. Our gardens are host to species that we didn't choose. Our forests, our homes, our imaginations are places of continual encounter with others. So ecologically, hospitality means recognizing that we are always already entangled. And nature isn't something out there, it's already us. We are already it. And so the title of the show, Love Beyond the Species and the Sexual, it points towards an equally expansive understanding of intimacy. So intimacy here isn't simply sexual, it's not simply romantic, but it's about proximity, it's about attention, it's about curiosity. It's about forms of desire that don't seek to possess the other, but to encompass difference without erasing it, to flourish alongside rather than at the expense of. And in a moment where so much public discourse is organised around hostility and purity and exclusion, that feels like an enormously generous proposition. And so perhaps radical hospitality is the kind of imaginative capacity that we need right now. This willingness to overcome what is unfamiliar, to remain open to this understanding, and to accept that we share the world with forms of life that are radically different to us, that neither resemble us or exist for us. Art can't solve the ecological crisis, but it can reshape the imagination from which our actions emerge. It can help us practice other ways of paying attention, other ways of relating, other ways of belonging. And I think that's exactly what Siobhán has achieved here. She's created a world that is strange and funny and sensuous and intellectually ambitious. A world that invites us to escape reality, not to escape reality, but to return to it differently. So congratulations, Siobhán. And enjoy the show. And remember, there are 2 other rooms upstairs which are going to play amazing tricks on you.